Well, hello there, and welcome to the Deadly Analysis Podcast. This is going to be a quick review of the recent Darren Aronofsky giant fat-ass allegory of a film called Mother. Actually, since there's an exclamation point at the end, it should be Mother! But I don't like doing that. That's too loud. Now, I saw this movie recently with my wife, who typically doesn't like horror films, but I knew enough about the movie beforehand to sort of drag her along with me anyway, in order to get a feminist perspective. Is it really a feminist perspective if I'm dragging her along with me? Paradox. In any event, I'm really glad I did because there's two very popular allegorical interpretations of this movie, and both her and I sort of gravitated to each of them. So I'm going to try and make this review as spoiler-free as possible, but there will be a little bit of what I think this film is about, because that's the real hubbub right now. That's what everyone's trying to figure out. And I think I can make it really easy for you. So if you're about to go see this movie, just bear with me. We follow a character only known as Mother, played by Jennifer Lawrence, as she restores the house of her poet lover known as Him, played by Javier Bardem. They live in a very secluded area in a house the size of a goddamn cathedral, so it's a bit of a surprise when a man who goes by Man shows up at their home along with his wife, who only is referred to as Woman. So we have Mother, Him, Man, and Woman. It's like a caveman came up with these character names. Man, woman, him, her. Anyway, things get a bit tense as Man and Woman sort of invade the home and ultimately the privacy of Mother and Him. Throw in a bleeding hole in the center of the house, an orange liquid that Mother drinks in hallucinatory moments where she feels the house's heart beating. Pepper it with a shitload of that escalated quickly, and you have a film that is set to confuse audiences for years to come. So here are my thoughts on this film. You have to go into the movie knowing it's an allegory. If you're one of those people who place the weight of their enjoyment on plot coherence, you're gonna hate this movie. This is why the movie is so polarizing right now. You have these bourgeoisie artsy folk loving the film because to them it's clearly about something extra narrative, and then you have the left-brain straight shooters having none of it because this movie's really just largely nonsensical to them. So it's all about how you view symbology and how much weight you prefer of it in a film. Now, I get the divisive nature of this film because I sort of went through both of these mindsets when I watched the movie. The first third of the film was just terrible to me. It was slow, it made very little sense, but then the ramping up occurred. The more the atmosphere became tense in the movie, the more I could see what was going on. And this is one of the things I'll give to the film, is how absolutely crazy and shocking it gets. There's points in this movie where you just think to yourself, there's no fucking way this is happening. And I think that alone is worth the price of admission. Like, if I were the one tasked with creating a tagline for this movie, it would be Mother. Well, that escalated quickly. Like, that would sum up the build of this film pretty succinctly. And so it's through the escalation that you see the allegorical nature of the film. You sort of have to, or else the film devolves into insanity. It's truly meant to be a kind of artsy horror film, and I usually shy away from these sorts of movies, but this one, I have to admit, captured me quite a bit. It's far from perfect, which I'll unpack here in a minute, but it kept me interested, and more importantly, it made me think a lot when the movie was over. And I think that should dampen some of the criticism. I mean, look, horror is a genre that's filled with terrible fucking movies. There's a reason we're on Saw 302, and there's a reason that movies exist like The Bye-Bye Man. This genre needs risky films like this. It needs films that engage your fucking mind, that make you mull over social and religious and political issues and their connection to the fear that's in the story. So seriously, let's not perpetuate the dumbnification of this genre by criticizing the film for its attempt at being abstract. That's in and of itself not a liability, it's an asset. Now, I'm going to tell you what I saw the symbology in this film to represent. To me, it was all about the cyclical nature of spousal relationships, specifically from the perspective of a woman. Like, take the very general, all too often cycle of falling in love, getting married, having kids, and then getting a divorce. To me, those stages were all over this movie. There were elements of this very sort of generalized relational degradation everywhere. Now, my wife viewed this very differently than me. To her, everything was perceived biblically. In other words, there was one character that was God, there was another character that was like Mother Earth, and there were two characters like Adam and Eve, and further two characters like Cain and Abel. By the way, little Easter egg if you interpret the film that way, how the film represents the Eucharist. Pretty nasty. Just going to throw that out there. So as you can see, there's at least room enough for two very broad and different interpretations of this movie. And that's my criticism. There's way too much room for these broad, overarching, differing interpretations. So much so that, in a certain sense, this film could almost be seen as like a blank canvas. Like, the more I think about it, the way you interpret this film could just be you interpreting yourself, like what you bring to the movie, how you assign meanings to certain characters in the narrative. It's just overly deconstructive, in my opinion. But see, I hold the view that there is such a thing as being too abstract and too open to interpretation. And that's really the danger, I think, in these attempts at allegory. We read things so much into the narrative that the film becomes a kind of blank canvas, and then, in that sense, ultimately about nothing. So while I laud the film for being risky, I think ultimately it became so generalized and so gray that it was kind of hard to find my anchoring. There may not be anything that this movie is actually about. Also, if I have to nitpick at this, the worst camera work I think I've ever seen in a movie. Every shot of Jennifer Lawrence is just way too zoomed in. And I get it, right? I get the artsy appeal of this. I get how it's supposed to function cinematically by way of emphasis. But holy mother of God, was it unnecessarily disorienting and distracting. But at least they were zoomed in on Jennifer Lawrence, am I right? So the pluses, very atmospheric, good pacing, fantastic tension building. You walk away thinking. I also enjoyed the two crazy cameos in this film. I will leave it at that. And in terms of the minuses, perhaps too abstract. Kind of bugged me. Perhaps a 9-year-old was carrying the camera the whole time. Who knows? In the end, I think it's definitely worth the experience, though. So if you like this review, be sure to check out some of the other horror films that we've reviewed this year. And also be sure to stop by on our weekly show that we do every Sunday night. We basically discuss the fears and philosophical underpinnings of good horror films, a new film every week.